here we go with our second book, Monster. I've tried to fix this microphone as best I can. Again, I just need better technology. So, I hope you guys like this one. Structurally, it's the most different outside of graphic novels. It's written in screenplay format. Point of view is a huge deal in this text, right? We'll talk a little bit more about reliable versus unreliable narrators, but that is one thing you want to make sure you notice. I pulled this from the NAACP. Obviously, we're talking about a 16-year-old boy on trial for as an adult, and his race plays a huge part in that. We're going to talk a little bit about implicit bias, but I want you to read through these statistics to get an idea not just about the role race plays in who gets incarcerated, but also just the general role America plays in incarceration. Not only are African Americans incarcerated at 5 times the rate of whites, but younger African American boys tend to be tried as adults, and boys of color tend to be tried as adults far more often than white boys. And we want to be thinking not just about what the statistics are here, we also want to be thinking about how environment plays into it, how systemic power structures play into it, all of which we will get into. But part of why we read this book, other than just it's a fantastic story, of course, is that it helps us begin to think about some of these complications. So, first of all, another kind of bias we're going to talk about is implicit bias, and that's the one that causes you to draw a conclusion about someone before you even know you've done it. So, it plays into stereotypes, obviously, but one thing to know about both implicit bias and stereotypes is they are self-fulfilling prophecies. So sometimes people will say stereotypes exist for a reason. And indeed they do, but those reasons are reaffirmed because when you are defined by a stereotype, there will always be a large chunk of the population that will then live out that stereotype. And again, this goes back to the notion that we live the realities that we have access to. So if the story of me is one particular story, then I'm going to reflect that story back to the world. And that's what I mean by self-fulfilling prophecy. The problem for this, as you can guess, is it then gets into our value judgments, not just our personal morality, but also social ethics. So, a really quick and messy definition of absolute versus relative morality. On the left, you have absolute. Good is good, evil is evil, never the twain shall meet. And that means that activities can get broken down into categories, and we can know how to define them. On the right, you have relativity, right? It's far more circular, it's far more flexible, it's far more fuzzy. Things are good-ish, things are evil-ish. Most of us exist somewhere in between. Very few people are completely relative. Very few people are completely absolute. Most people have certain things that are lines in the sand, but most things that are contextually driven. One of the problems with not being critical about your ideologies and your value systems is you often become blind to the moments where you draw lines in the sand, but move that line depending who you're talking about. So you get very absolute about people you aren't empathetic towards, or people you see as less human, or people you are feeling negatively towards. You get far more relative about yourself and your friends. There's lots of psychological studies that sort of walk you through that. In terms of our book, we want to think about this in terms of the effect on the justice system, right? So our laws, morals. And if my morality is defined by the law, what happens when the law is a bad law, of which we have many that are bad laws? Am I automatically a bad person if I break that law? Am I capable of being rehabilitated, of learning, of changing? Am I allowed the process to do so? Our justice system both punishes, and then on occasion you see a nod toward things like rehabilitation, but you can't do both of those at the same time. It's paradoxical. So, how do we deal with our responses to those matters? Is it a matter of safety, getting people away from the rest of society because they are in danger? Is it a matter of punishment? You did a bad thing, and we're going to punish you for it? Or is it a matter of you don't understand how to live in the world, and so you have to be taught. The other thing you want to keep in mind here are things like mandatory sentencing. Mandatory sentencing is absolute. Context doesn't matter. Uh, Bobo's not a good person. Like, I'm not arguing that we should hold Bobo up as a good person, but you have that line in there, and it's a quick one. It's easily overlooked. But he says, I hadn't eaten all day. The prosecutor is attacking him for his choices following the robbery, as if those choices are ridiculous. And from the prosecutor's perspective, they are. Now you want to go back to those Venn diagrams of perspective. From Bobo's perspective, he hadn't eaten all day. How does that play into something like stealing? How does that play into something like resources? And I'm in no way holding Thomas More up as, like, the arbiter of morality, but this quote is a good one. Utopia was published in 1516, and for all of its datedness, it starts to get us thinking about what we might call systemic issues. For if you suffer your people to be ill-educated and their manners to be corrupted from infancy, and then punish them for those crimes to which their first education disposed them, what else is to be concluded from this but that you first make thieves and then punish them? And that's one of the problems when we start to look at systemic issues. I've given some definitions here. Yeah, I used Wikipedia because sometimes Wikipedia is easy. There's nothing wrong with Wikipedia for quick definitions. The problem is when you start to rely on Wikipedia for complicated information. So it's a great fact check. It's a great starting place. Just don't build your life there. So systemic racism, systemic sexism, systemic classism, those aren't the fault of any one person. Those are things that make our society run. Like the stock market, they are both real and not real, right? The stock market is real in that it's a bunch of numbers somewhere. I mean, it's not a mountain, it's not a building, it's not something you can hold in your hand, but it's still real. When the stock market crashes, we all suffer. Same thing for all of your systemic isms. They affect what we have access to. They affect what kind of wealth we're able to inherit. They affect how the world responds to us. They affect what kind of opportunities we have. And it's really uncomfortable oftentimes for people to sort of deal with these kinds of things. We'll get into why here in a second. If you download the PowerPoint, those last 2 points are hyperlinks to give you some more information. And you can Google all of this. Other really good plays to think about this are Twitter. Why, when Rue was cast in the Hunger Games, did people lose their shit on Twitter over a 12-year-old girl? A 12-year-old girl, and people on Twitter, not one person, thousands of people on Twitter are calling her horrific names, right? That is not the problem of an individual. That is something rotten in the fabric of our society. And we're not the only ones with that problem. If this were a post-colonial class, we could get into globalization, but it is a thing you want to start to be able to see and think about, even if it's not something you find yourself wanting to think about very often. Another good example of that is the casting of Zendaya for Mary Jane Watson in the new Spider-Man, or the argument in something like Game of Thrones about historical accuracy. That's one of the ways we see things like white supremacy held up. Why are all the people in Fellowship of the Ring or Lord of the Rings white? Well, historical accuracy, people say, to which you might respond, well, there are dragons. So if there are dragons, we're clearly not dealing with history. So the idea of historical accuracy doesn't hold up unless it seems like it's supposed to be true. And that's how systemic systems work on us. So when we want to look at monsters specifically, one of the things that really is powerful about this is the way Steve's narrative and his picture of himself shifts, so that whatever the truth of the situation is, even Steve doubts himself by the end, which makes him an unreliable narrator in terms of what really happened on that night, right? And in young adult literature specifically, identity is always a huge theme, because the path from adolescence to adulthood is defined often in part by who we then become, how we grow to be the people we are. So not only is this a major deal in young adult literature, but it's a pretty big deal in literature. There are lots of stories with magic mirrors where you look and see yourself, and whether or not you can handle the truth of that mirror, or We might also look at the lasso of truth that Wonder Woman has becomes one more aspect sometimes of the hero quest and strength. So this is the very end of the book. After the trial, my father, with tears in his eyes, held me close and said that he was thankful that I did not have to go to jail. He moved away, and the distance between us seemed to grow bigger and bigger. I understand the distance. My father is no longer sure of who I am. He doesn't understand me, even knowing people like King or Bobo Osvaldo. He wonders what else he doesn't know. That is why I take the films of myself. I want to know who I am. I want to know the road to panic that I took. I want to look at myself 1,000 times, to look for one true image. When Miss O'Brien looked at me, after we had won the case, what did she see that caused her to turn away? What did she see? So this idea of how much we can see ourselves, what can't we see about ourselves, what do other people see in us? Because your identity is always part what you create, but also part of what's reflected back at you. None of us exists individually. We're all affected by the society we live in. So, agency is the power to actually do something, right? So if you want to hold someone accountable when they don't have agency, that gets really iffy, because how can you be to blame if you never had power over the situation? There's a book called Theory Toolbox. It's a great book if you ever care about any of these things. But our agency is both constrained and enabled by the context in which we find ourselves. And that duality is important to remember. You often, almost always, have some choice, but you probably don't have all the choice. And it's that line that gets things so muddy. And your subject position. So you think back to that first slideshow with discourse, it's the ways of knowing and speaking. So it's the position we hold sort of within all of that, and my super awesome artwork that I draw on paint exactly as well as I draw it on the board. All of those are aspects of your identity, right? And we could do way more lines, but I'm keeping it simple. When I walk into a situation, some of those lines light up. Sometimes all of them, sometimes one of them, sometimes lines light up or go out depending on the situation. So if I walk into a room and I'm the only person of my gender, gender immediately lights up. If I'm the only person of my race, if I'm underdressed, class lights up. If I speak differently, if I'm breaking the gender norms, then my sexuality might light up. If I have an accent, it's geography. If I'm pretty or not pretty or whatever, my appearance, right? So all of these things sort of go into our subject position, and all of them matter, but they matter more or less depending on the moment we find ourselves. That ties into agency, that ties into how we're interacting with the systems, yada, yada, yada. So, why Steve does what he does gets complicated. Why any of us do what we do gets complicated. And this is a hard part of critical thinking to sort of work through. It trips a lot of people up. Where do I come from? And where am I going? And how do both of those things affect the opportunities I have, the choices I could or could not make, the experiences I have to pull from, right? So how do these systemic power structures both privilege me or oppress me? And I love Bell Hooks. She's my fave, so you should go read a lot of her stuff. But white women and black men have it both ways. They can act as oppressor or be oppressed. Black men may be victimized by racism, but sexism allows them to act as exploiters and oppressors of women. White women may be victimized by sexism, but racism enables them to act as exploiters and oppressors of black people. Both groups have led liberation movements that favor their interests and support the continued oppression of other groups. Black male sexism has undermined struggles to eradicate racism, just as white female racism undermines feminist struggle. As long as these two groups, or any group, defines liberation as gaining social equality with ruling class white men, they have a vested interest in the continued exploitation and oppression of others. So, one of the best parts about this quote is it sort of shows how we exist in relationship to each other. None of these positions are concrete. They are all a little bit fuzzy. They're all constantly moving. A lot of them are dependent upon the relationships we find ourselves in a given moment. And when you think about how to work through some of this stuff, you're going to find people who, like she says at the end here, gaining social equality with the ruling class. So people who just want to have all the power. They don't want to fix the inequalities, they just want to be at the top of the hierarchy. You're going to find people who want to fix the inequalities and they're going to have better or worse ideas. Lots of social revolutions across history sort of show that playing out. The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, etc. Ideas that start good, end with lots of beheadings, look good on paper, don't work out so well. All of these things exist in complicated ways, which I know isn't very specific, but I just want you to start thinking about why they're true and why it's difficult to pin down sometimes, though everything's easy to prove with Twitter. So, one of the things that makes it difficult is that it's always personal. So, there I am, my little stick figure self, and there's the world above me, so fantastically drawn. And you want to see the difference here between the macro and the micro. So, social systems, the world, what it means to be white, what it means to be black, what it means to be Asian, what it means to be man, what it means to be woman, adult, child, adolescent, teenager, right? All of those things, wealthy, poor, etc. All of that exists in a big picture way that none of us can change or necessarily affect all on our own. So, I am never going to be an astronaut. Like, it's not a thing that's going to happen. I'm too old at this point, and I wear glasses. I'm also never going to be a Victoria's Secret model, because social systems have defined beauty, and I don't fit within that social norm. And I can be as upset about that as I want to be. I'm not. But me being upset doesn't change that social system. So, I can thwart gender norms also, but thwarting them doesn't change them or affect the fact that how we advertise to boys and girls is still going to fall along those lines, right? But I live all of those macro social systems individually, and that's why it's always personal. This is also why sometimes you will see people who have friends, a diverse friend set. They never call an individual a slur. They don't hate their friend because they're gay or bi or black or white or anything else. But then they will post memes on Facebook. They will make comments about groups of people. And it seems like a disconnect. How can you say this horrifically mean or hurtful thing about a group of people when your best friend or your daughter or your coworker that you like, when this person fits within that group? And it's because of the blind spot we often have between the individual experience and the macro, the social experience. So when things shift in the big picture, I always feel like they're shifting in my life, even though conversely, while I can like people in my life, I can continue to judge or create value judgments about that group of people without connecting the two. And that's a big deal for Monster. Because one of the things that's so powerful about this book is because we get Steve, we get a personalized story, right? The personal, I'm going to jump right to the end there, the personal is super powerful because it allows us to empathize. It gives us context, it gives us specific experience that allows us to see a picture. The personal is what allows us to work through that boundary experience. So if you want to blow up my vision of the world, if you want me to rethink everything I thought I knew, then me knowing you and me caring about your story is one of the best ways to do that, because now I'm invested. That's why the personal narrative becomes such an important form of literature, and that's why the story, the act of telling stories about people, is so powerful. And Steve gives us a character to latch onto. He gives us an environment and a family and a background, so that if we haven't lived Steve's life or grown up in a neighborhood like is described, we can then empathize and imagine what's going on there. And that's important because now I can show not only my identity, but I have some ability to imagine your identity as well. And I can begin to see what I'm born into in terms of privilege or marginalization, and what you were born into in terms of privilege or marginalization, or oppression. And marginalization and oppression aren't necessarily the same thing. And in some cases, like with white women, with black men, You're going to see people that have privilege in some situations and are marginalized in others, right? Because people are complicated. The world is complicated. And the key, a real big important part of critical awareness, is to begin to see how these systems shape us to see each other, and that they affect our implicit bias, they affect our confirmation bias, they affect how we conclude what is true of our world. And we like to have really precise answers. It's how we are trained to think because of the history of Western education we've inherited. 1 plus 1 equals 2. So the idea that something could be true for one person and not true for another is already bucking that system. And the idea that we could be making judgments that we're completely unconscious of without ever realizing it, and that there's only so much you can do to unlearn that or be aware of it or have any control over it, is also something that bucks that system. But we can learn to be critically aware of our position, even though it is almost always an uncomfortable process. But, I mean, there's Bell Hooks singing because she's awesome. It's important to remember that stories, because they shape our realities, can help us not just work through boundary experiences, but see where our boundaries are. So even if we choose not to push those boundaries, even if we choose not to go places that are really foreign to us, to be aware of where our boundaries are, mean that we begin to have more control over the self that we are creating. It means that we have more control over the media we're exposed to, the words we read, the conversations we're a part of. We can see how our beliefs are forming. We can think through, do I want to have an absolute morality? Do I want to have a relative morality? Do I want to form some combination thereof? Do I want to separate out my ethics and my morals? Morals are personal, ethics are public. Maybe I find something immoral, but I don't think it should be illegal. Maybe because I find it immoral, it should be illegal. Those are the kinds of questions that we have to work through as members of society, because the answers to those, whatever answers we all agree on, affect how we build society. And that's what Bell Hooks means, amongst other things, when she says revolution begins in the self and with the self.